Welcome, everyone. My name is Kate Collin. I'm the mayor of San Rafael, and it's awesome to have all of you here in the chambers and those that are watching online for our Wildfire Prevention Community Forum. Obviously, we're bringing everyone together, really instigated by what we've seen in Los Angeles. And I think what we're watching on the news hits us all in a lot of different ways. My husband is from LA. We lived in LA when we were first married. We have several friends who've lost everything, and talking to them brings it to a whole new level. And so we're all naturally inquiring, if you know someone or not, what is being done there? What is being done here? How do we learn from what's happened in Los Angeles? And let's be clear, even though the solutions and many of the actions are the same, it's different. We live in a different environment here. The Santa Anas are truly like being under the world's largest hair dryer. They're very hot and dry, but that's not to say there aren't things that we all need to be doing individually. So that's what we'll be talking about tonight. We have some preset questions, and then if you have other questions, we are fortunate to have Councilmember Kurtz here. You can hand her questions. She's also the president of the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, and that's a JPA that was created with the passage of Measure C, and I know that our panel will talk about that. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel. If you don't know them already, we are so fortunate to have with us Fire Chief A. Roman. He's been in the fire service for 38 years. Before coming to San Rafael, he worked in every rank within the city of Berkeley's fire department, ultimately serving as fire chief. In your current role, he leads the department's mission to help prevent and respond to wildfires in all emergencies. Thank you, Chief, for being here. Quinn Gardners, she's our San Rafael's Deputy Director of Emergency Management and has been with the city since 2018. She marshaled the development of our 38-point wildfire action plan, which I know she'll speak to in some of these answers, and currently leads the San Rafael teams dedicated to wildfire risk reduction and implementing San Rafael's Measure C wildfire funds, as well as our All-Hazard Emergency Operations Center. Thank you, Quinn, for being here. And I even brought my go bag because I learned about go bags from Quinn. And the first thing she said was like, do you really have everything in there? And I don't, but who doesn't love show and tell? So thank you, Quinn, for continuing to educate me. And we also have Kate Anderson here. She's our San Rafael's Wildfire Program Manager. She's worked for the city since 2020. She leads our open space management and vegetation programs and manages the daily operations of our wildfire mitigation team. She is a registered professional forester and former wildland firefighter. So you can see the talent and the expertise of these professionals is amazing. We are so fortunate to have all three of them, plus the others in the department. So before we get to the questions, I'd love to turn it over to Quinn because we did have some community partners that were here today.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mayor. Is it okay if we sit, or do you want us to stand as we go? Just, okay, I want to start so I want to thank everybody for being here and joining us online, and the interest that we've seen since the LA wildfires. And kind of the resounding points that'll probably come up through tonight is that as devastating as these fires are, they aren't San Rafael or Marin's wake-up call. We've been actively working to prevent that happening here for over 5 years now, and we'll continue to be diligent about the work that we do, and we'll touch on various points and answer any specific questions you have. But I do want to specifically thank Fire Safe Marin is here. They've got great educational material out there. Hopefully they're going to hang out a little longer, but if you are inspired by something we say and you want to run out the door and go grab the pamphlet that makes sense, and they're a great educational partner throughout our community. And then we also have the Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership group, which is one of our great environmental partners that really have helped us develop our best practices in terms of how we relate to wildfire as an ecological benefit, and that these two things aren't opposing. And again, we'll touch on that. And then, of course, we've got folks from our team are here with different materials, how to schedule an evaluation with us, things about our grant and direct assistance programs, and all sorts of materials. And we'll be here after with those materials as well if you need anything else. And I don't want to put anyone else on the spot, but thank you, PG&E, for being here. You guys have also been a wonderful partner, and I think the last couple of years we've made a lot of progress in how we work together, and it's been truly wonderful. And of course, thank you for the mayor for being here and hosting us, and look forward to the questions.
Okay, so we'll get started. We have about less than a dozen questions, and as I said, if you have any that we have not touched on, please give them to Councilmember Kurtz. So we're going to jump right into it. So I'm actually a native Californian. I have always lived with wildfire, but it definitely seems like it's changed in recent history. Could you speak to us how fire starts, how it spreads, how it ignites, how it's contained, so we can start to understand the risk? I think historically, wildfires were something that only happened in open space, and all of us are trying to level set what it looks like today. I'll start with
Yeah,
the chief.
correct. Yes. So as we expand to the wildland urban interface, that's where we start running into a little bit more danger in there. If we don't have an ignition source, we won't have a fire, no matter how windy it is. So a lot of our efforts has been focusing on reducing our ignition source. And secondly, if we do have an ignition, is in a vegetation managed area where the fire flame or the flame lengths will be a lot smaller, even under windy conditions. And do we have the firefighting resources to be able to put it out? It's kind of like the trifecta to be able to get that. If we get that, we can keep the fire small, keep them contained, and be very aggressive with them to put them out. So, and we all know that there is climate change, and what that's manifesting now as the wind conditions and really odd conditions. At the Grapevine last week, one day it was northeast winds with a big fire, and less than a week later, there's snow on top of there. I find that to be a little odd. Um, for us to understand that concept, especially as firefighters, now understand that that is a truth. There is factual things that are happening around us, and we've noticed that over the years. And one of the things I have my hats off to Sarah Fell that we have been working on this for years, even though that it comes to light and we have the 2017 fires, and we start talking about that, and then perhaps the last couple of years we've been pretty safe and we haven't had major fires around here, but that has not deviated us from our very aggressive work that we've been doing throughout Santa Fe and Marinwood, and building a lot of partnerships and building a lot of stuff through home hardening, vegetation management, a lot of contacts, and also modernizing our fire service also. So these are all big things that have happened and continue to happen. Now, do we have like an end goal? Like we said, we will say like, okay, that we're done. We've done everything we can. We're done. No, it's an evolution that we're going to continue on. And I was talking to, I believe, Mayor or somebody earlier yesterday. We were talking about how we as human beings adapt to our environment. If I pause on that concept right now, we are totally adapting to an environment right now as human beings that we have no control over the weather, but we certainly have control over our behavior and how we prepare ourselves for that movement. Now, I'll have reference to, some of the fires that we've had, or that were down in LA. There was the Pepperdine University fire. I forget the name of that fire, where everybody was told to just shelter in place. And we saw a lot of videos where people were sheltering in place. If we build a community that's like that we could just shelter in place and literally fire can just go past us, we are far better as a community. And talk about of us adapting to that climate change, where we no longer have to evacuate. We just know that we need to sit on at our house for a little bit. The fire front will pass, and we'll be fine. So that's kind of the concept as we start looking at stuff as modern and develop as human beings to how do we conquer climate change.
It's a good summary. Chief, I think the one thing I'd probably add about fire behavior is in understanding fire behavior, we understand how we adapt to it. And so one of the ways that we're seeing fire spread is embers. And so it's not the wall of flame coming through, it's embers landing. And if those embers land where there's nothing to burn or just it burns itself out, we don't have a problem, right? We have a little ember. And we have had multiple fires in San Rafael where embers have landed in places they didn't do anything. And therefore, the firefighters were able to get in there and start and get the fire while it was still small without losing property or lives. And so when we think about how to harden your home, and one of the analogies I like to use as we're trying to explain this to folks is during those winds, whether it's October or, to be fair, a couple weeks ago even felt like it could have been October here. If you wouldn't feel comfortable walking around your property and dropping a lit match somewhere, please don't actually do it. Just like visualize it, right? And think about that. And if you're like, oh, if I drop this match here, a bad thing would happen. That's where you want to do work, right? That's where you can start adapting your property. because that's, you're equating that to an ember and what that's going to do. Is that your gutters? Is that the leaves built up in the eaves on your house? Is that all the dead brush under your favorite rosemary plant, right? That's drying out a little bit. And so as we think through some of that, it helps us understand. And it's also, Chief mentioned climate change, the weather, topography, things that we don't have a lot of control over, at least immediately. The thing we can control around us is the vegetation, which is why sometimes we get dubbed, my team gets dubbed the plant police, which is not what we want to be, right? But what we're trying to do is this is the thing we can control. And if the thing we can control helps us reduce our wildfire risk, then let's control it, right? I don't think anyone can go cut a new mountain or a valley or add a new, right, totally change our topography or weather conditions on any given day, but we can figure out how to work with our vegetation and our houses, which are also fuel. And so that's why we look at those properties.
So we had firefighters, strike teams that went down and assisted. I'm sure you all know this, that San Rafael did participate in helping to fight the fires in Los Angeles. And I'm curious, even though there's similarities and differences, what did the teams bring back, or what did they learn? And maybe it's what you've already alluded to. When you talk about a fire wave, I actually can't, hearing that, I can't even imagine that, because the videos that I've seen, it's literally a mega fire in a wall. So I believe you, but I'm curious what the teams have brought back and said we should be doing this differently or prioritizing differently.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily to do different. It's just reinforcing what we're learning and what we're training out there on. Very aggressive as far as the learning fire behavior, what this fire is going to do, calculating what it's going to do based on wind conditions, the topography. So just reinforcing those things for sure. Now, a big part of this, I wasn't part of the 1991 Berkeley Oakland Hills fire, but during that incident, there was no such thing as an incident command system. There wasn't. There was every department for themselves. They had their own command structure. They had their own thing. It is dramatically different now, where we have unified command right off the bat, and we identify the key players that are going to make decisions. Could you imagine yourself back in 1991, where I'm a fire battalion chief running a fire, and I grab a police officer, and I'm telling him I need you to do this, but there really is no other communication other than I need you to do this. So there's no structure, there's no prioritization, there's nothing on there. That's where we run into problems like that. So now we have an extremely structured program on the incident command system in California, especially in California. Now it's a national system, but it was developed by the Southern California fires and then enacted it and codified after the 1991 fire. And now it just exploded from there as far as no pun intended, as far as how we structure everything. To me, and I have, let me introduce Chief Chief Hatfield here. He is our EMS chief, but he's also our battalion chief that's working today. And then, so correct me if I'm wrong or anything like that, but as we were responding to calls, every incident that we're responding to, we always create a command box around it. So right off the bat, we're always saying this fire is not going to go past this. If it does, these are the triggers. So we identify triggers right off the bat. But to me, in my head, and mind you, I'm a fire chief, so my tool is a radio in my hand, and that's my tool. That's all I have, and maybe a piece of paper and a couple computers to work off of. But the reality is, what I'm trying to do is I'm responding to the call. I'm building a command box around that structure. A lot different than what we thought of 20 years ago, as far as there was no command box. It was just kind of, you're just going to run a couple companies and I'm going to tell them to go over there. It doesn't work that way. We're planning for the large incident. Even if you look at it, we'll start with the divisions is all the way from A to Z. We always build it out. We always start on maybe G and H, knowing that we're going to build it out from that. So there's never a time that we'll sacrifice that command structure. And a command structure is always there to expand based on that incident. Jason, you have anything else that you want to share?
Yep. So thank you.
We all kind of saw the images on the news of those fires and the wind and the destruction. It was very impactful to us, and I think they, seeing that firsthand down there, just going through some of those communities and just seeing the level of destruction that occurred. It was, it was impactful for them, and I think, as the fire service in general, these fires are obviously destructive and unfortunate, but they offer us opportunities to kind of go through and take lessons learned. Like, so we find out which homes survived, maybe what were some factors. We talk about like exclusion zones and different types of vegetation and things like that. So, our crews definitely took some things back, but then the fire service as a whole is going to, benefit to make us safer in the end here.
No, that's really helpful and important to hear how the department is reacting. And the other part, and the folks that are here and the people that are listening, is like, okay, how do we show up as individuals and residents of San Rafael? And a lot of the emails that Councilmember Kurtz and I have received right after the fires, and we are going to talk about home hardening and what's been done here, but first we'd like to talk about evacuations. And it seems to me, and I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, that 10 years ago, maybe the evacuation warnings came a little bit later, or maybe they weren't as aggressive. And what I learned from our friends and family that still live in LA, that they were quite aggressive. Altadena was a little different, but in the Palisades, people were evacuated very, very soon. Could you speak to that? Because it's different if you have more time, and what the philosophy is now around evacuations and what we should be taking away here.
Yeah, and I'll start out with the history, and I'll let Quinn go a little bit more in depth on specific to us. So, if you remember the 2017 fire, the Tubbs fire, where that was kind of a disaster as far as the messaging going out, the activation, the wheel, which is basically the page that you got on your phone saying evacuate now. And even in that, to be honest with you, as a fire service, we were not prepared for that. We had forgotten about 1991. Now, so I was on the Tubbs fire. I was at the incident command post of that fire. So I got to see a lot prior to me even going to the incident command post. At the time I had a Ford Explorer was my chief's vehicle. I had 11 people in that vehicle. I don't know how the heck I did it, but I stuffed 11 people in there to the point where I remember feeling the heat in the back of my head and thinking, this is not going to be good. And I didn't even get a chance. I'm literally wearing Levi's tennis shoes and t-shirt because I basically got to the fire and we were already we're total action mode at that point. I was able to get 11 people out of there, and I just got them out of there. And, before we even had a place to take them to, I just kind of said, who's got somebody, and says, I have a friend in Windsor. Mind you, none of these people are related. Great. That friend's going to get a quick visit from 11 of us right now. So I dropped them off there and they stayed in the garage. I know they were safe. I just don't know what happened to them after that. So we'll take that scenario. I was in the 2020 on the glass fire. Similar type of situation, dramatically different. It was structured. We had zones at that point. We started evacuating zones, and got all those people out there and still maintain a clear way to get into the fire at the same time. Much different. We've learned from our mistakes, and we use that same technology here in Marin County, how we now address evacuations and basically structure it. It doesn't help me to pull people out of here if this is a priority. If this is my priority, I will flush people. There's still going to be people leaving on there, but I could make it a strategic plan on how I want these people evacuated. And once again, now I'm partnering with the police department to get that done.
And could you also answer how people will know that they should be evacuated?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one, if you see fire. So I never want to underestimate that. I think a lot of times people do rely on us to tell them. And I want you first and foremost to rely on your own intuition and what you see around you. The biggest thing that folks don't always understand is our emergency alert system is an opt-in system. So you have to go to alertmarin.org in the transition of becoming.gov. Both will work right now, and register. And you can register multiple addresses. So you can register your kid's school, an elderly parent, whatever the case may be. If you're signed up for Nixle, which all you did was text 888-777 to a zip code, that's a different system. It is a redundancy. It's actually a redundancy that's phasing out because of technology limitations. And so you have to get signed up for Alert Marin. And Chief alluded to WIA, which, how many of you got the tsunami alert a couple weeks ago? If you didn't get that, you have turned WIA off on your phone. So that is a forced notification, similar to Amber Alerts. It's going out based on cell phone towers. That automatically will hit every cell phone it can, which also means, to the chief's point, it's not the best tool when we're trying to do a structured, organized evacuation. But if this is everything bad is happening, we need to get people paying attention, it is a tool, but people still sometimes turn it off. So you need to be opted in. And the other thing I would say in terms of how we've improved evacuation is we spent a lot of time on our roadside vegetation management. And so we've really tried to pull the vegetation away from the roads, the dense, especially our 10 and the fuels that burn quicker and easier. One, it prevents ignitions, right? The cigarette butt out the window, the dragging chain is less likely to start an ignition. And two, it keeps the heat away from you in the car if you have to evacuate. And while it might be very uncomfortable, the the research and the studies of fatalities on fires are showing us very few, if any, people are dying in cars while evacuating, and particularly in the environment that we've tried to create in San Rafael, that would hold true. So I think one of the other lessons learned out of LA is how many people abandoned vehicles and then created traffic jams, sticking people behind them, which also then forced bulldozers to be clearing roads instead of cutting fire lines that could have been slowing or stopping the fire. So the first and foremost message is stay in your vehicle. If for some reason you do have to abandon it, you run out of gas, something like that, get off to the side of the road and leave your keys in the ignition in case somebody else can move it. But more than likely, you should not. You should still be safer in your vehicle on a paved road that we've done vegetation management around than any other scenario as part of your evacuation.
I think Marin County might be one of, if not the only county in California to tax ourselves through Measure C and the creation of the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. So I think we all need to recognize that was a really, really big deal that we did that, and we did that years ago. Because of that, we've been able to adopt here in the city very strict vegetation standards that go beyond the state. So between you and Kate, we'd love to hear more. Why is that important, and what should we be doing? And I did bring additional show and tell in addition to my go bag. This should look very, very familiar to you all. You feel free to point to it, but if you could talk about vegetation management and our role in that.
So one of the other lessons learned we see with these fires as well, the WUI is most impacted. Entire cities and areas out in communities outside of the wildland urban interface have burned down. So one of the first things we did was we said the vegetation standards don't have a random line. That is, we literally had neighbors that had different vegetation standards because the city did adopt vegetation, particularly around juniper and things in 2007, but that was just for the WUI. So following the 17 fires and council's direction to not let that happen here, we developed what ultimately became the 2020 ordinance that updated the municipal code for citywide vegetation standards. And it does look at every zone around your home because the science tells us that area 5 feet from your home is going to be the most impactful. And think about that the same way you're by a campfire and the marshmallow that's in the flame is going to catch fire right away, right? So we don't want the vegetation on fire right next to your house if your house is the marshmallow. Weird analogy, but roll with me, right? That 5 to 30 feet zone is when you're back. If you hang out long enough, right, that marshmallow is going to toast, but you can also be there without any damage. And so we start building our vegetation standards around that. And that's really what we've done within the code is we've used the science to say particular plants, but more so spacing and maintenance that works within those zones. And then we do our evaluation program to educate, talk you through it, help you prioritize it. That's the door hanger the mayor showed. And Kate can certainly speak a little bit more to some of those specifics.
Yeah, so Quinn mentioned kind of the overview of why we're doing what we're doing. And I do want to back up to the last question because alerts and notifications are a huge part of our one-on-one interactions with you, making sure that you're signed up during evaluation with you. And I want to make sure that everybody signed up before we leave here tonight. We can help you afterwards, figure out which notification systems you still need to sign up for to have the best information. But our first kind of line of defense in adapting our city to wildfire and making sure that we can provide the best service is our one-on-one interactions. These are through scheduled evaluations, wildfire risk inspections, but we also go door to door during peak fire season when it's not a rainy evening, and most people are tuned into why we're coming out. We do kind of start now. I mean, we are starting now because of what's been happening, but we're starting earlier and we're extending our season later. So the whole fire season is dead. We're in a peak season, but we want to make sure that we're prepared throughout the year. And there's different things that we can do throughout different seasons that are good for your plants. This gets into more of the ecologically sensitive practices. There's something that we can do to prepare your home at each season of the year, and that builds, and it's not an all at once type of thing.
And what happens, so when we get our reports, if you are a homeowner and let's say you don't understand some of the information on here. So what do? You get this and you're like, okay, who would I call or how would I follow up on this? And I see there are QR codes, so maybe that's the obvious answer, but again, we want people to take action. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's a little bit hard to have this. I mean, it did sit by my phone for quite a while until I read it and download it. But if you could speak to if people want to do something and maybe don't know exactly what to do.
Yeah. So first, we hope you answer your door. If we are coming by door to door, if you're home, we hope that you invite us to help walk around your home, identify kind of from that house out, what Quinn was mentioning, starting with that zone 0, that 0 to 5. That's where we want to start to reduce any ignition sources. So anything that's, getting back to Quinn's campfire analogy, anything that's fluffy, kind of tindery, you're kindling. That's where, especially in these ember-driven fires, we're going to see the most impact in removing that from your house, especially if you still have combustible siding, anything combustible on your home, getting up to kind of the upper levels of your home, your roof, making sure that that's clear of any of the fine material that can burn quickly when we do have an ember storm.
Yeah, and I think what we could spend like 10 hours, right, telling you everything. But what's really amazing is within these door hangers, there's a website and you get a customized code to your report that we've created. Ideally, we've been able to walk your whole property with you and none of it's going to be a surprise. But if you're not home, we've at least done it from the front door, from the front street. And then you get some information and maybe you can extrapolate that or you invite us back to do the full evaluation. And that report will give you a full prioritized list. Anything that's required is at the top. And it'll also link to the resources we have available to support you in that specific thing. So one thing the City Council adopted a few years ago was requiring all wood shake roofs be replaced with Class A or more fire resistant roofs by May of 27. So right now, as an example, if we come to your property, we see a wood shake roof that goes in your report, it's also going to show up as grants available, and we'll help you up to $7,500 to replace that wood shake roof because we know it has community benefits. It's not just your home that's going to be protected with that. And so there's a lot of other items that we offer various financial and different assistance for. And if you can't get into your report for some reason, just contact our office. We have our generic email. We help people walk through those processes all the time.
So we had a meeting with the Gerstle Park neighborhood earlier this week, and we had an excellent question. One of the residents wanted to organize their neighbors to do a bunch of broom pull or cutting back. And if you could talk to that answer that you gave to them, because I actually hadn't heard that question and answer before.
Yeah, I mean, so much of adapting to wildfire is in partnership with community. And so we love when volunteers want to do stuff. We love our Firewise communities that work together to help all the private property around them. But we also support a lot of different volunteer broom pull groups. Some of them are just a couple people. We have groups that literally go out every week, and they've made huge impacts in whatever the open space is that abuts to their favorite area. And then we will coordinate debris removal. And we actually also have broom pullers, the tools in which you can pull broom easily that we will lend out, no charge or anything. And so we love those organized events. And the San Pedro Coalition puts on a really big event every year. And we love the reoccurring ones. So you tell us what you're doing and we'll figure out how to help you get rid of the debris, whether that's a box or a chipper or how to pile it or tarps or anything like that. But we love working with partnership with community. And broom is one of those really invasive woody species that is not great for our environment, period. And also just it carries fire because of the way it grows. And so it's tough to get rid of. It takes years of repeated work in an area. So it's an awesome community-led event. And we are happy to support anyone doing that.
I'll just add to that. When we think of fuel reduction, we think of work on public lands and city-owned lands and state and county. But we've been able to support broom pulls on private lands as well. There's a lot of larger land holdings within the city, adjacent to public lands, kind of intermixed, that we will help support putting on an event as well. So not limited to one type of land holding.
Thank you. So we received a couple of questions, and I see Councilmember Kurtz has some additional ones. And these, I think, are really reflective of what we read in the paper from the fire down in LA. So the first one is, how do all the different fire departments work together? Does the equipment work together? Obviously, we have a shared services agreement, but if you could speak to that.
Certainly. So one of the inherent problems during the 1991 fire is that the hydrants there had a 3-inch discharge on the Oakland side, and every other city had 2.5-inch. And there was probably a handful of adapters at the time. Well, I wasn't working at Berkeley at the time, but during my time at Berkeley, we still carried those adapters in case there was and every engine carried one, and it was old brass adapter that everybody carried just in case, because we were so afraid that we were going to find a hydrant that we were in Oakland area that we were going to have to use that. Subsequently, that's all gone now. They're all 2.5 inch and standard 2.5 inch and 4 inch steamer connections on there. So that has definitely changed as far as the interchangeability of tools on there. The other thing that's, and I have I have our partner from Central Marine Fire here.
Welcome.
So he could vouch for me on this. Currently, the way our system works right now is basically it's a boundary drop. So right now on a high dispatch, so meaning that it's a windy day, you will get 12 fire engines, a bulldozer, 2 airplanes, a helicopter, two battalion two battalion chiefs, and 2 crews and 2 water tenders. That's a lot of equipment that's rolling on there. So I know that everybody's really the vulnerable conversation right now is the water part, right?
That was the next question, but keep going. Yep.
So we already plan on that happening. That's why we roll with water tenders. So our plan is that we're not even in, that's not even the equation as far as a hydrant. A hydrant's a luxury for us at this point, but we are going to roll in there like we have already bring our extra water tenders also on there, and we have some alternative type of water supplies that we could get some additional water tenders for sure. But that's how we roll into the call. We're already planning that there's not going to be water there. So it's a little bit different stance that we take in the city. I think the cities are really used to using their hydrants. We're just used to not having water, to be honest with you.
And that was exactly what this question was. How are you certain there'll be enough water? And is this approach for any fires that would occur within Marin County, the resources that you just described?
For wildland fire, yes. Structure fire is a little bit different, but a wildland fire for sure. This is how we're rolling on there. And when including during the summertime, we also have a helicopter that's staged out of Novato. So thanks to PG&E, we do have a much closer resource. So we're not waiting it. Otherwise, we're waiting for, and it's not that long, but we are waiting for one to come in from either Boggs Mountain or down in Santa Clara County that comes up in there. But usually it's about a half an hour wait for them. So we have those resources. We've trained together. Our dispatch system is flawless now, where basically it doesn't matter what resource. It's one center that's processing that call. It's the same center that grabs the 911 call. We have anywhere from we have 5 dispatchers on it at any point, and all sort of auxiliary staff also. In addition to that, it's no longer a dispatch center, and this is what's unique, and this is why I say this constantly, is we have probably the best dispatch center in the Bay Area at this point, and I'll tell you why. The reason is that it's actually not a dispatch center. It's called an emergency command center. So in theory, the theory behind this is that the emergency command center already carries out responsibility to augment, decrease, or the resources based on the 911 calls. A true dispatch center basically just gets the call and sends it out. That's the way it works. They send it in, they look down some protocols, and they send it out. It's just a conduit. An actual emergency command center is actually making decisions based on what that call. If we're getting multiple 911 calls and saying that there's somebody stuck on there, it's an automatic second alarm response. So they're augmenting the resource on there. So it's very unique that not a whole lot of counties have that. We're very, very, very fortunate to have that here. So it's really a great system in there. So there's that part of it. We constantly train together. We carry the same tools, same size hose. Everything's the same. So really, we're on our strike team that we're just on. The strike team is a set of 5 fire engines. We have 1 strike team leader, and every one of those fire engines is coming from a different organization, and the strike team leader is from a different organization. And the last one, I believe, was Novato Fire, and we had engines from Central, from Novato County. So it's just a mixture of it. So and you couldn't tell the difference whether it's a San Rafael fire engine or Marin County fire engine, where you carry the same equipment and tactics.
I know the question was a lot about the response and the mutual aid and how everybody works together, but I also want to emphasize the work that happens together on the prevention side. And so we're doing, with the structure of the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, that's 17 different agencies that are at the table together, working together to say what's our best way to reduce risk in the county and how do we do it together. The tax measure is really unique, and the JPA language is really unique because it gives local jurisdictions a lot of autonomy to decide what works best for their community. Obviously, Novato is different than Mill Valley, is different than San Rafael, and we have different needs. But we're also all at the table with a lot of common and being able to share best practices and take approaches that really work and not just create random fuel breaks that aren't connecting and aren't working together. So there's a lot of that mutual work happening on the prevention side.
Quinn stole my thunder. It's going to mention that. That's great. We're on the same page. Yeah, I think, just to expand on what Quinn just mentioned, 17 member agencies, those are fire agencies, but they could be town, depending on how those jurisdictions are built, depends on the participation. But in addition to our fire agency and our town partners, we do partner with other large landholders, California State Parks, Marin County Parks, and then in some areas, National Park Service and MMWD. But I really want to make sure that it's known that we're working really hard to improve San Rafael and what San Rafael needs and work within our city boundaries. But we're also looking at those areas on our boundaries, which may be kind of arbitrary just across the map. But what we see in Marin is that a lot of jurisdictional boundaries are aligned with topography, which are the perfect areas to focus on when we're planning these larger level kind of landscape fuel reductions or kind of strategic areas where we can improve a fire road, which is already a built-in fire break. So that really, really helps us. And so to be able to do that, we also have to coordinate a lot. We're in a lot of communication with our partners, finding out our goals, our objectives, and then theirs, and really meeting in the middle.
So we're lucky to have the president of MWPA here, the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. So I'm just going to quickly hand the microphone to Rachel. So if there was something that you would want the community to know about MWPA, in addition to what the panel just said, because I'll read those, but you can just speak briefly.
Okay. So I hope everyone is already familiar with Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority and also our work in collaboration with Fire Safe Marin. As everyone's talked about, you hear a lot that it depends, but the work that we're doing at Marin Wildfire is really, it's the contribution of the whole community and the funding from the tax measure. And I would encourage every resident to become really familiar with the website of Marin Wildfire, because there's so much information in there and you can see exactly the projects, what has been funded. Every meeting we have is open to the public, and the videos are there. So please, take time to do that or reach out to me. I'm happy to show you the information that's out there, because we want the community involved and to know how that your funds and the tax measure is supporting the community.
Thank you. So these questions are again around evacuation. So what do we do in the event that the unthinkable is happening? And I'll try to group them together. So one was a suggestion for evacuation scenarios to have it filmed in San Rafael or animated so people can actually see it without maybe having an exercise, but how they can make it real. So if you could speak to, is that a tool that's been used? And then how do people know what's the best evacuation point? How are we supposed to know what to do?
Yeah, all great questions. The visual is a great idea. I would say, speaking of the MWPA, Mark Brown, the executive director, put together a video where he's kind of going through an evacuation, driving downhill and talking about it. So that video is available. It has a little bit of fire that they tried to overlay on it, but it's not quite to the level that I think would be really interesting. I think that we didn't touch a ton on Zone Haven, and while the zones are really important for us, and it's nice if you know your zone, it's not overly important you know it because it's tied into Alert Marin. So we can control it and you're going to know it. You don't have to know it by number. But I think we also do the evacuation drills, and we've had a lot of folks that have done those, and you've got to add that level of intensity, right? Add the timer on your clock and see if you can actually get out in 10 minutes. And what did you bring? And then to stop and say, what did I forget? So there's a lot of, I think, small things people can do at home to kind of add that intensity in practice. And I think the hard question always is we can't fully predict because the situations could all be different. And I don't want to tell you how to evacuate in a certain wind condition, and that's what you've got locked in your mind. And then we've got a different kind of wind condition, but generally downhill and away from vegetation. And if you are on a 2-lane road that is paved, you are probably safe at that point. Uncomfortable, yes, but safe, yes. And then the areas of last resort are the other thing that I encourage everybody to kind of think about, which ultimately is an age-old firefighting concept, which is how do I survive if the fire comes here? And the answer is be in an area void of fuel. So right? Sports fields, large parking lots, even big intersections potentially, right? Could all be survivable space if you really can't get somewhere completely out of the fire and a firewall or a big wave of fire does come through that area. And then the other place is back in what's already burned, which sounds really counterintuitive, but I think one of the videos, I think it came out of the Paradise Fire, had somebody driving through the black, which is the burnt area, terrified, then drives through the fire and then gets into unburned fuel, thinking they're safe. And the reality is they just got to the scariest part of their journey, is that unburned fuel, because that's what has the potential yet to burn and to hurt them, right? Where they were in an area that had burned, or as you're driving through that. And so thinking through that, and that's one of the ways you can plan. And then I guess the last thing I would say is just don't always take the same way out, right? Like make your grocery store run a way to try a different road that you normally don't try. Just get familiar with whatever that back way or longer route is out of your neighborhood, because that might be the route you need to take. And some of that direction might come through an alert marin during an evacuation, because we want all apparatus going in one way and we want everybody else going out the other. And we'll do that in partnership with our law enforcement.
So you touched on something that I know I received emails about, and people are concerned they have one way in or one way out of their neighborhood. And so maybe Zone Haven is part of this. How do you estimate the number of cars? And is that part of, and I hear what you're saying, like every situation's different, depends what type of fire, what the conditions are. How does that get calculated in the density of a neighborhood when you're making these decisions?
Yeah, so Zone Haven does give us all that, which is awesome. And we actually have pre-printed books that have all of our zones and literally say number of homes, estimated population, vehicles, critical facilities like schools. So that's a lot of great pre-planning work that our incident commanders and emergency communication center can use. And then I'd say the other piece of this is, I think it was a state law a few years ago, within our housing plan, we actually had to identify one way in, one way out areas of more than, I believe, 30 homes. So we've already got some of those areas mapped as well. And those are areas that strategically, right, become priorities. It's the places we might try to get out first. And it's also where we focus a lot of vegetation management, either along the roadways or in the open space around it. Because again, there's only so much we can control. Repaving and adding entire roads is a much tougher thing to do than to make sure we're maintaining the fuel that's around there.
So one thing that we saw on the videos from LA was people evacuating people who were seniors or people with disabilities in wheelchairs. And those are just the most heartbreaking, terrifying videos. So what are the plans? How do we ensure that people that would have to be, that need additional support evacuating? One, so what are the plans around that? And then what if someone doesn't have a cell phone? How are we going to contact them?
So Chief's answer with 11 people in his vehicle is not the ideal situation, right? That is like a last resort. And I know Steve's here and I know Amy's here, and I'm sure there's a few other neighborhood association and neighborhood kind of groups. And that is one of the best ways. We do not have the resources as a fire department to go to every home that has someone that may be mobile via wheelchair or not have a vehicle that day. Maybe their car's just in the shop, right? But that neighbor to neighbor relationship is so critical. So if you know everybody just a couple houses down on either side of you and you can be in touch, or you know the person that might need assistance evacuating and you're checking on them, that is where unfortunately we see a lot of fatalities during these fires, is people that either didn't get the warning. So sign up for alerts, that's in your control, right? That got it and just acted too slow or chose not to evacuate, or did the Midwest thing where you have to see the tornado before you actually believe there's a tornado. I spent a lot of my career in the Midwest. Or unfortunately couldn't evacuate, right, because of some circumstance that limited that. And so how do we overcome all of those things? There are programs like Vivalon and Marin Center for Independent Living that can be good resources for some folks, whether that's assuring you have battery backups to your garage door or medical equipment. But it really comes down, again, we do this in partnership with community, to the neighbor to neighbor piece, and going early. And one of the things we just wrote into our wildfire playbook, the chief was very adamant about adding, was that if we have really bad weather days, not just a red flag day, but like the purple, if you will, right? That we're encouraging folks that might need that extra time. Like, do you have somewhere else you can stay? If you're up in the hills or you're immobile or you don't have the vehicle, can you just kind of pre-evacuate? And worst case scenario, you got to go see someone you haven't seen in a while and had dinner. And I don't know if you want to touch.
That was an analysis that we did, and how we grabbed that analysis is that we have a lot of red flag days that just go throughout. Some of them don't even affect us. So what we did the analysis of the Tubbs fire, the 1991 fire, all the major fires, and there is a definitive wind direction, speed, temperature, humidity that's there. We have now caused that. We have now now have that as a trigger for additional type of either resources or messaging out through us from us. Is that those are the things. So I'm very proud of the work that your team did on that, because now it gives us a definitive trigger for me, both on staffing overtime. Do I need to staff an additional engine? Do I need to staff multiple engines? And that truly is my trigger mark. Do I need to now contact to the police department, make sure they have plenty of dispatch, plenty of police officers, and that kind of work? So that is a definite trigger that we have now, which is very different than a lot of organizations that don't necessarily have that at that point. So, for us, we've done a deeper dive into the analysis and really figured out where we need those extra resources, and then the trigger that does. Because the municipality, that's where we constantly, well, is it or is it not? Well, now we have very definitive guidelines around that, and then also using what we call spot weather forecast. So we will actually get a forecast specific to our region here, or specific to our city, and triggers everything else in there. And the messaging is this: if you have mobility issues, either by not having a vehicle or just mobility issues in general, we would prefer that you spend the night at a hotel, find a friend that's down in the valley, go in the city, a good night in the city, and get a dinner, and probably a good night to go watch a show that night. Those kind of things like that. Once again, I'll go back to: is it an inconvenience, or is it just as human beings are we just modifying to what's the atmosphere that's out there now? And to me, while it is an inconvenience, as a human being, I'm evolving to go see a show on very windy nights just because I can't get out on the road really fast. So those type of things.
Quinn, you said something that I think resonated with a lot of us, which this idea that a firefighter will be at all of our houses helping us one-on-one, and the importance of community. And I'm just curious of the folks in the room, how many are part of a FireWise neighborhood? Okay. So nearly everyone. And so maybe one of you could speak to FireWise, because I do. So we have a FireWise neighborhood where I live, and you meet your neighbors. We know everything that you just listed. I was like, oh yeah, I know all that. Right. So maybe you could speak to what that is for people that haven't. And then if you're in a FireWise neighborhood, how do we get other neighborhoods? Maybe all our neighborhoods are FireWise. I have no idea. Maybe you can speak to how San Rafael's doing.
Not quite. We're trying to get there.
Okay. I like that goal.
yeah.
Councilmember Kurz, can that be our goal? Everybody in a FireWise neighborhood?
So FireWise itself is a program from the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA. And essentially you go, and what a neighborhood is can vary. And so if you're in a really large neighborhood and you're like, there's no way I'm going to get everybody's buy-in, you can make your neighborhood a 4x4 block or 1 block or whatever kind of works. And then essentially we'll help you do like a risk assessment. So we'll come walk your neighborhood, go over things that you can change. And then a lot of it focuses on how much as a group, whatever that group looks like, you do together to reduce your wildfire risk. So if you have common spaces, maybe you're maintaining the common spaces, maybe you identify the 3 most risky houses or the folks that don't have the resources to maintain their own properties, and you come together. Or just as a neighborhood, you say, this is the year we're all going to replace our vents, and we're going to get grants from San Rafael to do it, and then we're going to log it to FireWise, and they're going to say, great, you're maintaining your status. And it's also just, right, most of you, how many of you know about this meeting because of your FireWise neighborhood? Not too many. Okay. Because, right, we did send it out to all of our FireWise leaders, and Fire Safe Marin works really closely with those folks as well. So it's a process basically where your neighborhood gets the distinction and then you maintain it. And we have seen some, although obviously the insurance industry in California is in a big state of flux right now. But we have seen some insurers at a minimum that at least smile at it and maybe don't drop coverage. And I believe there is one that offers a very small discount for FireWise neighborhoods. So there's a little bit of an incentive there, but more than anything, I think it's a tool that if you sit there and if you're saying, I already did everything, it's my neighbor's fault, my house is going to burn down, FireWise is your answer. Right? FireWise is how you get everybody together and you get on the same page and you work together to make sure there is no weak link in your neighborhood, however you define that.
That's really helpful. So hopefully everyone will be inspired if they're not already part of one. So one of the questions, and I melded it into another one, but I want to pull it out again. So sometimes cell phones stop working, and I know that happened in those mega fires, and you might have already answered it because it's about the timing. It's about, we're not waiting until the last minute, but what would happen is that a time when we would have the fire department knocking on a door, and then it's like the game of telephone, you go knock on your neighbor's door? I mean,
yes, and yes. So following the 17 fires, there were state laws that required additional battery backup for cell phone towers. So that helps with some of it. Having said that, there are still always going to be tech issues. And so neighbor to neighbor is one way. NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Association Administration. Thank you. I knew I messed up my last A. Have you realized the last A of every one of my spell outs is always the problem, the last letter? So they have weather radios that you can have. Traditionally, they've been used for like hurricane warnings and tornado warnings, but the Weather Service here has agreed to use them for wildfire, so that's a backup. The other piece is we have purchased, we have 2 right now, portable LRADs. So one of the things that we would do if we had a fast-moving
I don't know what an
evacuation,
LRAD is.
long range acoustic device, a really loud loudspeaker that we can speak through and you can pretty much understand it at good distance. So it's better than the squabble. So in addition to the kind of microphones that are already on most of our police vehicles, we have these 2 additional tools that we can mount to vehicles, go up and down streets, which we would do in partnership with law enforcement. And so that's a tool, right? At least it gets your attention and you're paying attention. We can't give you all the information we can in an alert, but it gets you paying attention. It gets you taking action. And then if your cell phone's down and you still have internet somehow, the emergency portal. So emergency.marincounty.org, transitioning to .gov. If you're not aware of that website, please be aware of it. It has a lot of great preparedness resources as well. But anytime there's an active situation in the county, it's there. And they've got a map, and they actually also list most of the prescribed fires. So if it's ever the question of, is that fire good or bad? You can check that website first if it doesn't look like it's scary. Oh, we have and all of our police vehicles. Thank you. That was 5 years ago we did that, so I forgot about it. All of our police vehicles now have the high-low sirens, the woo woo. So it's a different type of siren to get your attention in a different way. And that would be another tool we'd use in evacuation.
And added to that, the police department actually has it where it's actually, they have a pre-recorded message now that the same message goes to every police car. So it's kind of a unique system once again to San Rafael that they could actually start dispersing that message right off the bat. Instead of the high-low siren, there's actually instructions going back there. So a lot of work from the police department also has gone to that.
Right. So the whole point of this meeting today, and then we also have one online next Wednesday, I think at noon. Is it Wednesday? Is it Wednesday? Tuesday? I can't remember which day of the week it is. But okay, maybe it's Tuesday. The reason we're doing this is we want to find out the questions that the community has. And you are already out in the community. So could each of you answer this question of a misconception that you've heard, maybe from the public, that you would like to have this moment to clear up? Because you are out talking to people and you've cleared up a lot. But so maybe it's answering a question you've already answered. You want to start? Kate, Quinn?
I'm holding the mic.
Okay,
I'll
go ahead.
start.
Kate, yep, go ahead.
We haven't gotten too much into a lot of the fuel reduction projects, at least tonight. And so fuel reduction projects are a landscape change. You know, it's a physical, tangible change of the landscape that not everybody is used to seeing. And so one of my goals with our vegetation management program, in a holistic view with everything else, is to really have people understand that the fuel reduction projects that we're doing are essentially a mimicking of a natural disturbance, and in this case, fire. And so we're trying to prepare, and in a lot of cases, restore the landscape after a lot of years, a century or more of fire suppression, back to a state where fire, it becomes more low intensity. We have more native vegetation that's adapted to that low intensity fire. And that the projects we're doing are really aligned with ecological values. And that's where we work really closely with our ecologically sensitive partnerships, where we focus our efforts, especially in the planning process, to make sure that we're talking to folks, you know, about what their concerns are and really moving forward after we've cleared up a lot of those misconceptions around what fuel reduction is and how it can help. Nesting season, big misconception. There's a lot of regulations, rightfully so, around protecting habitat throughout different seasons. And so our big habitat preservation time is nesting bird season, which is February 1st. We're already in it. And the end date is variable depending on the agency, but we observe in August 1st. And it doesn't end right there. That doesn't mean all the birds decide it's time to be fledged. But we are We are working throughout that period for most of our projects. If we don't work in nesting bird season, we are in a rainy season throughout the winter. Also, not great for erosion control issues and so many other things. But if we wait till the end of nesting bird season, now we're into peak fire season. And so finding that balance of working throughout the season, working with biologists, surveying our fuel reduction areas, and making sure that we're not impacting habitat negatively is a big goal of ours.
Thank you.
I think mine's just really general. I think a lot of the times we get the misconception that we're not doing anything. And I could tell you that every day, literally every day, we come to work to make a difference, either through vegetation management, through prevention, through operations. We come here to make a difference every day. So you might not hear from us or anything like that. This is why it was important to have this kind of meeting so we could have this conversation. But we are literally every day, this is our job to make sure that people are prepared. And if we can prevent the fire, we will prevent the fire. And if there is a fire or an emergency, we're ready to respond on there. And that truly is that is my life's goal for the last 30 something years. This is what I do. So this is my profession. This is what I care very much about, our community. And I'll share this with you. It is my overall goal to make sure that San Rafael is one of the safest communities in the Bay Area, period. And that is my goal. And this is why we put so much effort in everything that we do, either vegetation management operations, having the fire engine out there, making sure that we have the very best fire engines up there, making sure we're fully staffed, making sure we have good vegetation management policies, rules, any contracts that we have with contractors, make sure we have nothing but the best on there. That is my job to do that. So the misconception is that we're not doing anything. In reality, every day we come to work and do this type of work.
Yeah, I think kind of similar to that is I think one of the things we hear a lot is it doesn't matter what I do because that thing over there or my neighbor over there. And the reality is the closer to home you are, the bigger impact you can have. And so while yes, you might be pointing at something that can be a risk, I want you to also turn that finger back and look at what you're doing at your own home and check especially that 0 to 5 foot. But we all have opportunities, right? Myself included, of more I can do at home to be safer. And the reality is the dead oak halfway up the slope, 500 feet from any house, depending on everything around it, but that's probably not the biggest risk to your home, and that you have opportunities closer. And it is one of the things, every time the mayor forwards me a concern from a resident or we get one directly, one of the first things I do is try to find that resident's report because I want to know how they're really doing. And if I have a way to get back in touch with them and say, you've been doing great, keep this up, yes, this makes sense, or yes, I understand this concern, and here's a few other things you can do and how we can help support you do them. And so every time we point out, right, there's some mantra there where like when you're pointing out, you can't not point at yourself. And I just really encourage folks to look back in. And I think that's always a big piece of it. And that we do, even in the most challenging, and this came up with the Crystal Park neighborhood, with some of our closest together homes, there are still things we can do to be more resilient.
So we are blessed to be surrounded by open space, and you've talked, Chief, a lot about preventing ignition, and I know we have a PG&E representative here as well. So what else are we doing to prevent ignition open space? So I'll ask that question, and then we'll close out with one more question for all of you.
Ron, would you mind? Yeah, just tell us what PG is
Putting
doing.
you on the spot
Yeah,
here, but we need a mic because we're recording.
Why don't you come down, Ron? And then
You can introduce yourself. Thank you. Nothing like showing up to listen, and here you are in front, answering
but
questions.
Ron doesn't come out very often. When we do, we got to capture him.
Yeah, be careful what you ask for. So my name's Ron Carlin. I work for PG&E. I'm a public safety specialist assigned to Marin County. So my main role and responsibility, sorry, I didn't want to block you in.
No, you're great.
My main role is to work with both the fire agency, law enforcement, and the county OEM here that manages emergency type activities. And so, our goal first and foremost, and I know, we get both good and bad recognition under PG&E and the things that have happened over the past years, but I can share with you and our closest regional VP lives here in Marin County. So he's very vested in the things that happen within Marin County. And so we work together in collaboration trying to support a lot of efforts that are going on under PG&E. So, we work closely with the fire department and trying to help support them understand. And that's why we're here tonight, is to just hear and understand more about your concerns in the wildfire prevention, which is one of our highest priorities under our organizations. Our stand is all catastrophic wildfires will stop, and anything that we have to do with those ignition starts. So we're always out there trying to improve that profile of reducing fire starts. One of the things that's come out of the LA fires, I've read a lot of postings about why didn't they shut off the power in LA, in part of where a fire may have started that's still under investigation. But there is some accusations there already. And so that's why we have really embraced what we call the Public Safety Power Shutoff, PSPS. And we work closely with the county during those events, during the summer when we have those phone or north wind events. And there are chances that we may shut power off in Marin. I've only been here for about 2.5 years, but I'm sure some of you remember the one of the recent or newest, the first PSPSs that occurred in Marin County, like in 19, I think it was. And it was pretty dramatic, where they just kind of pulled the trigger and shut all power off with Marin. And it was off for several days, caused a lot of problems. And so, we've worked to refine those systems and protocols in PG&E, so it's a way better, robust system now. We have a lot more controls over where we can isolate power shutoffs based on the need. And Marin's been very fortunate for the last couple of years in not having to go through an event where your neighboring counties have. Napa and Sonoma get hit constantly during the summer, and sometimes 3 or 4 times where we have to shut their power off because they're getting hit the hardest. So we've done a lot of advancements in that, but that's one of our most powerful tools that we have available to make a very quick intervention. And since we've been doing that, we have reduced our fire starts almost by 85% just by a tree limb coming over a power line coming down, starting a fire, and it may be catastrophic, as we have seen up in the Sonoma Napa valleys in the past that the chief alluded to. That's an immediate effect that we can do. It is very inconvenient for those of you that experienced that, but shutting that power off is one way to ensure we won't have an ignition start when we have high winds and a potential for a fire start. We've also have done other safety devices, EPSS systems, which also are devices we're putting on lines that become very sensitive. And we can adjust those during the height of fire season, so that if a branch hits a line, it kills the circuit immediately within 1/10 of a second. So if that line does come down, it doesn't start a fire as well. We're undergrounding, which is probably the most big thing you see on the news when our CEO is on a commercial and talking about undergrounding. But it's a very slow process. We do about 300 miles a year through our territory. And most recently, up in Mill Valley, we had the opportunity to look at some of the circuitry through some of that high fire threat area and get that on the mapping for undergrounding, which will probably be about 2 years out. But just the fact that we're getting some Marin County area being considered for undergrounding is a big deal for me to support and for your communities, and helping, some of those situations where you have high fire risk, one way in, one way out, situations that your staff here have alluded to, is undergrounding some of those situations will make it a very safer situation for that. And I'm thankful that Chief mentioned about the helicopter program. It's a weird offshoot of what PG&E is doing, but we have been able to secure a contract through Marin County Fire and through the Board of Supervisors, who have supported that in collaboration with PG&E. And so during the summer months, we've been able to host a Black Hawk helicopter in Novato, ready to serve the communities in Marin during the fire season when there's a fire. Like the chief alluded, having a heavier punch to those initial fire starts makes a difference, whether it's your fire engines responding with staffing or air support, where we can get to some of those areas and punch it hard. That's our goal, is to support Marin County in multiple ways. So without taking up all your time, those are handfuls of things that we're doing to make sure that we are engaged. We're here to support San Rafael, your communities, and the efforts of mitigation for wildfire. prevention, as well as, the greater Marin County, and I am your face that works with your fire department specifically to help with what they might need and we can support them with. So.
No, Ron, thank you very much. It just underscores how that all of our agencies are working together. And I know there are additional questions, but what we're going to do is I'm going to ask one more, and we're going to have all the collate all the questions. So when we have the online Zoom next week, we will, which is on Tuesday, did we figure out? Okay. Well, we didn't. We'll figure out what date.
I have the flyer somewhere.
I know we have the flyer. Does anyone have the flyer with them?
It's in my pocket.
It's an online, but we'll be sure to get to all those. And what we can also talk about is putting on the website an FAQ. So if someone's not interested in watching the discussion, they can at least read it. So I think that's something that we have, because we have it's Tuesday. We have all the questions. At cityofsanrafael.org. And so we can figure out the fire department page.
Yep.
So it's /fire, but we'll figure that out. We can put it out through Snapshot and let people know that's where the FAQs are. So there's been a lot of information. I know I learned a lot. So if you had to distill it down, you get your elevator speech, you get a minute to tell someone what it was that you would want them to take away from this conversation and to be thinking about. What would that item be?
I think 1 minute. I think kind of tying into the last question is please don't be the person that starts a fire. And I do say that sincerely because we don't have many naturally occurring fires in Marin, and they are human caused, and at least we have one verified decent sized fire in the last couple years that was landscaping related. So what we do on red flag days and during those, that really does matter. But I think more than that is just that you are in more control than you think. And while fires, once they happen and they're rolling, feel really scary and feel like we don't have control, this is our moment to have control and to take action. And that we are here to do it in partnership with you. And we have a lot of resources for you, whether those are grants, direct assistance, education, there's so helping you sign up for emergency alerts, that this has to be done in partnership as a whole community, and that we can make a difference. And we have seen it. And maybe one of the hardest things of our job, to Chief's point, is like we're quantifying a negative. Like our success is something doesn't happen. And so while it's been quiet the last couple years, that's not by accident. That is very intentional, and we have been able to get the fires that have started quickly, and we've kept them small, and we've prevented a lot of ignitions. And so please move forward with us in partnership because we need you to keep our community safe.
Quinn teed me up with partnership because that's really my big takeaway as well. Everything we've done over the last 5 years has been in partnership with our community. We want to be able to provide those resources to you, keep you engaged and up to date on what we're doing as well. And I think one of my big hopes by the end of the tax measure and beyond is to kind of create kind of an elevated baseline knowledge around wildfire safety, individual agency about how to prepare yourself, and understanding and an understanding of what we're doing and that we're a reliable partner. And really changing our culture around wildfire preparedness and safety and what wildfire means in Marin County. After 100 years of suppression, what fire can look like on our landscape. We know what we don't want it to look like, but really getting into a whole nother topic maybe for next Tuesday, but what fire can look like on the landscape and our perspectives and attitudes around that.
Yeah, for me, San Rafael's it's a strong community. It's a resilient community. And I think a lot of it has to do in the partnerships that we work with the community. If we rely heavily on the fire department that we're going to be able to put everything out, especially with the conditions that we see during climate change now, that's not reality. The reality is that we work together to ensure that first, the ignition doesn't happen. If it does happen, it's in a vegetation managed area. And our developments that are out there are all to the modern standards and still having a very robust firefighting force there. And those are like the key points on there that I like to make. But certainly, if anything, a look at the partnerships that we have together is what's going to make us more resilient as human beings.
Absolutely. And I'll just close out by saying when I was watching the videos, as we all were, what's happening in happened in LA, and the fear, and I think the takeaway I want is it is scary. It's a scary thing that's happened there, and it's scary to think it could happen here. And you've just heard we all have agency and we have a way to show up. And to me, that is the part that helps me just bring down my anxiety, to know that we have the resources here. We've taxed ourselves. We've made the decisions. We're changing the vegetation around our house to make a difference. And to continue to lean into that and just have your neighbors make those similar decisions. That's the only way that we can continue to not have the event that we've been planning for. So we appreciate all of you coming out on a stormy, rainy night. As I said, this has been recorded. We'll do FAQs. We have another online on Tuesday. And thank you for caring about San Rafael and for its resilience. Good evening.